Let me show you how you can make morphs with Blender, or more specifically, how you can bring them back into DAZ Studio. So the application is you have a character, you have a piece of clothing, and you export that, hello crab, and you export that into Blender, and then you make a change to the object, and then we want to bring this back as a morph into DAZ Studio. And many people have problems with that because there's so many settings. I thought I'd run you through it. This was, do I remember who asked this? No, I'm so sorry. I do not remember who asked this, but I've had this little discussion with somebody on a YouTube comment thread, and he said, you know, every time I bring in my morph back into DAZ Studio, my mesh seems to explode, and it really, I don't know what to do. I've tried everything, nothing seems to work. I don't know what else to do. And I'm familiar with the phenomenon. Let me go and use a gray Genesis 8 male character for that. So imagine you want to make a morph on him. And let me show you exactly the steps that are necessary to make this happen without issues. So the first thing, if I'm using the dev rig character, all I need to do is change this guy into low resolution. That's under the parameters tab with my figure selected under mesh resolution up here. And you just change this from high to base resolution. That's important. Don't export the high resolution even if you're making a morph. The reason for that is that you can't bring it back at high resolution. It needs to be base resolution because the high resolution here is implied by a modifier, so it's not actually baked into the figure. So DAZ Studio, when it imports the morph, will give you a geometry mismatch error. So that's often the case when you export this at a high resolution and then bring it back and try to create a morph from that. It just comes up with an error, and the reason for that is you need to export it at base resolution, make your morph at base resolution, and then bring that base resolution back. The second most common issue that people come across is that they've followed that, they use base resolution, but their geometry still doesn't match. And they said, hey, I haven't changed anything in my editor. And I totally appreciate that. You probably haven't. But what may happen is that the dev rig figure doesn't have that, but your other figures will have items like the eyelashes or the tear duct on here. So when you export those, make sure you make them invisible. So just click the eyeball icon in the Scene tab. You don't have to delete these items, you just make them invisible and then you export them. So that's important to remember. Switch those things off so that you only have one single object. Otherwise, if you had eyelashes, DAZ Studio will merge them together, and you then create your morph. When you bring it back, you have a geometry mismatch error because it's two objects rather than one that you have exported. So make sure you've disabled all these things. So at base resolution, let's go over to File, Export. And should I use Toon Mouse for that? I'm going to use Toon Mouse for that. That's cool. I'm going to put it in here and call that Genesis 8 male. That's all. Base, maybe, whatever. That's cool. Save it. And just like before, you want to probably use the DAZ Studio preset and set the scale to 1%. That's all you need to do, really. Everything else you can leave as is, hit accept and export your figure. And Blender should be able to understand that. Let's go and remove the cube and bring in that figure that I've just made. So that is under Blender. Toon Mouse, conversely, OBJs, and then there's the Genesis male base. And just like before, I'm going to go and disable split by object and import him. Takes a second, and here he is. Awesome. Click off him, click on him again, and then that's the figure selected. We can, just for the sake of checking, is this the right size in Blender? Now, if you hit N and the properties come up here, I think under View you can see. Where do you see that? Is it under Item? Actually, it's under Item. There we go. You can see in the dimensions that the Y, which is the up and down axis in Blender, is 1.81 m, and that is kind of the size of a regular human figure. Chris, absolutely. Did I not show that? That is a vital point. Chris, you're the man. Let's just while we're here, very important that when you export, make sure this little guy is selected here. Where is it? Where is it? Ignore invisible nodes. Yeah, so mine was enabled already. So I think when you use the DAZ Studio preset, it comes in automatically. And this is kind of vital to understand. If you untick this, then everything that's hidden in your scene will be merged into the OBJ that you're exporting. So make sure you don't do that. Make sure this is enabled, like Chris suggests. Ignore invisible nodes. So when you now have eyelashes that you made invisible in your scene, now they are not exported. But with this thing disabled, they would be exported. Do you know what I mean? So one of those things. Thank you, Chris. Yes, very good point. So in our case, luckily we don't have that issue, but yes, very, very important to remember. So now with my figure in here, I'm sure it has the correct size. Let's create a morph, some dummy morph. So I'll go into edit mode, click A to deselect everything, and just use something like proportional editing and maybe a face selection, something like that. And I'll just go and just move that out. Yeah, there we go. That's perfect. That's my morph. Awesome. Woo! Great. I'm an artist now. This is now Wonk Morph HD. $30 please. Yes, so that's my morph. That's my morph. I've made a change to the character. Obviously you would do a much better job than I ever will. So let's go with the figure selected, head over to File, Export, Wavefront OBJ once again. For Chloe, Sydney, it's kind of different. You don't have to. For Chloe, you can use the high res to export and drape your garment to that, because it'll probably match the resolution in DAZ Studio better. So in Chloe and Marvelous Designer, it doesn't matter because we're not bringing the mesh for the avatar back into DAZ Studio. Good question. So yeah, you can use high resolution for Chloe. But it's kind of up to you. So if you like Chris suggests, if you use base resolution, you have a smaller file, and you can basically use the subdivision smoothing modifier in Chloe when you bring in the base resolution. That kind of looks nice as well. We might cover that next time actually. Good question. So if you were to export the low resolution to Marvelous Designer or Chloe, you can smooth the faces of the avatar, and that has the same effect as using the subdivision surface modifier in DAZ Studio. Very good question. Toon Mouse, and I'll go and put this also into this same folder here, and I'll call that G8 Morphed. I'm going to call it Amazing Morph. Amazing Morph, there we go. Hey, caramba. Morph, there we go. So in here, I can use this scale at 1. I don't know, this is kind of depends on how you want to do it. If you do this, you have to now change the scale on import in DAZ Studio. Let's leave that, let's do that. So let's keep the scale on 1. But what I find important is under geometry, you should enable keep vertex order. So this is something I found is important when I bring my morph back. So that's all we need to do here. Scale, set the scale to 1. That's the default, and keep the vertex order. Also up here, a bit like what we had with DAZ Studio, selection only will make sure that your OBJ only consists of what you've currently got selected. So in my case, it's the Genesis figure. If you had other bits and pieces in your scene, disabling that would merge them all together, and in DAZ Studio you'd get that geometry mismatch error again. So make sure it's selection only, figure selected, then head export. And let's do this thing. Wonk Morph. Awesome. So then you're welcome, absolutely, no problem. So in DAZ Studio, let's go and bring in that change that I've made in Blender as a morph. So that happens under Edit, Object, Morph Loader Pro. That's where that happens. And this is now where we have a plethora of import options, and those two things combined, that's kind of the key to success. Morph Loader Pro, choose the file, like in our case, Amazing Morph. I like it. And in here we now have further options that we can set. So on one hand, I had expected for us to have a scale section, which we don't. I thought that was here. Was that not here? Am I making that up? Can I not change the scale on import? We'll come to that in a moment. So I think the biggie here is this here, primary figure from graph or primary figure vertex order, and that'll determine if your figure now explodes or not. I think I may have made a mistake on export. I think I didn't change the scale in Blender, but we'll see what happens. So one of these is the success option, and the other one is the devastating it doesn't work option. I think it's vertex only. If I set this to vertex only, I think Morph was created successfully, so that's good. I think this is going to go horribly wrong now, but let's figure it out. Nope. Kind of, yeah, so scale is terrible, but other than that, the figure itself works just fine. So let me do this again in a moment. Right, yeah, so the scale at the output needs to now be increased by a factor of 100. I did not set that. So let's do that first. Actually, let's export this guy again. So when I exported it from DAZ Studio, I divided by 100, and now here on the output I need to multiply by 100. So that's here on scale. So that needs to be set to 100. Selection only obj, that's cool. I'll say amazing morph 1. Export that. And now with edit object Morph Loader Pro, choose morph. That's now amazing morph, I suppose 1. Let's use vertex order again and hit accept and see if that works. It does. Look at that. So that works fine. So that has worked. I like it. Also works in the negative. This is a great morph. Yeah, I should sell that. But what sometimes, so when people have this explosion issue, then it's usually the way this option is set here. Let me try. I'm trying to find a way for this to explode now. So if this is not set to one of these, set it to the other. So I've had success with either of them, but non-success with the other. So I don't know why. I'm going to set this to from graph now. Hit accept. Loading morph. Did that work? I can't tell. I'm not sure if it worked. And I've had issues with this slider now causing this explosion, but it only works sometimes. So if you follow these instructions, it should work. So export with vertex order and then import with this other option that I just had. I don't know why this doesn't work anymore. I can't tell you. I can't tell you. Might have something to do with the export from Blender. When this little box isn't ticked here under geometry, this keep vertex order, if that's disabled and you import it with the wrong setting in DAZ Studio, that sometimes has an issue. One other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is when you don't use a base figure in Genesis, if you don't use a base figure in here, let's go through this whole process again with another morphed figure. So I'll go and use the same guy again, but I'm going to give him a full body morph on which you can make a change. So imagine we have something like, that's under actor, isn't it? Actor, full body, real world. Let's say bodybuilder and body tone. I'll give him that body tone, doesn't matter. Body size. Yeah, that's perfect. So we're gonna bring over an already morphed figure. So that's also sometimes what confuses people. There is a way to do this. You don't have to use a base figure if you want to make a change. Sometimes you want to make a change to a custom character. So I'll go and export that. Oh, is it that? Right, the keep vertex order. If you don't check that causes the explosion. Great. Maybe we can demonstrate that in a minute. So let's export this guy and put him in here and call him G8 custom. Export. So in here, once again, I'm starting from the DAZ Studio preset and I'm going to divide by 100. So I'm going to set the scale to 1. And then everything else can stay the same, including ignore invisible nodes. Make sure you've switched off the eyelashes and tear ducts and all these things. And of course, something vital that I've forgotten is the mesh resolution. Haha. So instead of high resolution, make sure it's base resolution. Very important. Then we go and export this guy, G8 custom, and use exactly these settings. DAZ Studio preset at scale of 1%. Hit accept. That's that. In the Blender, import our guy. And this was G8 custom. Y up. Geometry here will go and not split anything. That's quite nice. Keep vertex order. That's in the polygroups. We don't need polygroups for this, but then. Sanj, thank you so much for subscribing. I appreciate that. Here's a man. Let's make a dummy morph on him. Just like before. That's my morph. I like it. To export him out again, File, Export, Wavefront OBJ. Give it a name. I'll call it Custom Morph. And this is what Chris is suggesting. Keep vertex order. That needs to be enabled. Otherwise, so by default, when you do that, it is disabled, and that causes the explosions. So thanks, Chris, for confirming that. I had a feeling it had something to do with that, but so enable that for sure, absolutely important. And then the scale, crank that up to 100. So that comes in at 1. Make sure that's set to 100 so that we multiply the scale on the output of Blender. Hit export. And then back in DAZ Studio, we'll bring this morph in now. But so here's another thing that people encounter with custom morphs that they export and then bring in again. So there's a little tick box here that when you go and open that custom morph, there's this little tick box down here. When you open this dialog up, it's called reverse deformations. So that's set to no by default. And what this means is that it kind of refers to the base figure. So if you're bringing in custom characters, you have to double click into this thing here and set this to yes. So I don't actually know why that doesn't work. Pose, I think. Is it pose? Reverse deformations, is that? Oh yeah, right click and then set it to yes, right. So it's not a difficult, tiny little drop down menu. Right click on it. No is the default. No means if you're bringing in a base figure, it needs to be set to no, but it needs to be set to yes if you're bringing in a custom morphed figure. So if I leave this on no and I create my morph and I go and crank it up, we'll see that usually there's issues with that. You can probably see it in the legs. The legs are behaving differently than I would have expected it. And that's because I didn't set this correctly. So you need to set this to yes if you're bringing in a custom morph like we did. So let me go and set this back to 0 and see if we can bring in a different morph and see the differences. So under Object, Morph Loader Pro, bring in the same morph here. Custom morph, and now I'll set my deformations to reverse deformations to yes. Hit that. It tells me, hey, this morph already exists. What we're going to do, reverse def on, I'll call it, just so that we can see the difference. Then now we have two morphs, and this one behaves just, you can see on the legs here, this behaves just like what I had set up in Blender. Whereas the previous one that didn't have that will deform the legs to a certain extent. Usually on real characters, on real morphs, you see this much more pronounced. But yeah, that's the difference. If you have a character that has a custom morph on it, make sure you enable reverse deformations when you bring in the character back. And also super important, vertex order, keep the vertex order. Yes, exactly, Chris. Also, if you're using posed characters that you want to make a change to in Blender, also very important. So anything that means you have dialed up a morph or a pose, bring that out, make a change, bring it back in, make sure reverse deformations is set to on. If you use a base Genesis figure in its base position with nothing else, make sure it's set to off. And basically that's the secret to success.